Okay, everyone. Welcome back to our class. We had a little break for 2 weeks. Now we're back full force, our prayer class. It's nice to see everyone here that's on Zoom and anyone else that's on Facebook. Always a pleasure. And okay, give me a second here. We'll just get started. Oh. Okay, if I saw. Let's see what goes on. Okay. Okay. We are ready. We are ready to go. First, we're going to start off with a little story. This was after World War II, just after World War II, right after the terrible, tragic Holocaust. And there was rumor that in Europe there were many Jewish children that were trapped in different monasteries around Europe, the Christian churches, that they had many children whom they had saved. But the Jewish community felt it was their duty. It was right after World War II, and the Jewish people, they felt it was their duty to go and retrieve all these kinderlach that have been taken by the church, because if they were to leave them there, they would go and leave the Judaism. So they wanted to bring them back to the Jewish community. I mean, kudos to the Christian church. They saved many of the children. If not for them, those children would never have been alive. But at the same time, there were many that suspected that there might have been a little bit of an ulterior motive, as in the Christian religion, to have a Jew becoming part of Christianity for whatever reason is one of their biggest mitzvot. You know, when a Jew converts to Christianity, it's considered, unlike the Jewish faith that does not believe in proselytizing, right? We give people a hard time if they come to the Beth Din and they want to be Jewish. We tell them, hold on, are you sure you want to do this? We do allow proselytization. And when someone does convert, they have the highest place in the Jewish community, but we do not encourage it. We do not encourage it. That's the Jewish way. Unlike most other religions that have sort of an agenda of proselytizing, whether it's Christianity or Islam or many of the other religions, it's all about getting more adherents and saving the world by making them all join their religion. So after the war, there was this suspicion that there were many kids that were Jewish who were being held by the Catholic Church, and not just held, but maybe they were a little bit being not, let's put it this way, they were not upfront about the fact that they had Jewish children, not upfront to the Jewish community. So there was a delegation of rabbis that came at the time from America, and their job was to go to the different monasteries, to the different homes that these children would have been held. So there was one particular monastery in Europe where there was a suspicion that there was a lot of Jewish children there, and the rabbis came there, and they came to the Mother Superior, and they said to her, you know, there's rumors that there must be some Jewish children. She says she doesn't think so, not to her knowledge. But any Jews, there's children here. The rabbi says, no, it's after the war. You know what happened, and many of the Jewish children were taken in by the monasteries. We need to bring them back to their rightful home. So she says, go ahead, be my guest. If you can prove it to me with documents or in any other way that these are Jewish children, we will release them to you. So the rabbi says, okay, I will prove it to you tonight. Just tonight, why tonight? Just before bedtime, I'm going to come back to the monastery, and I'm going to go there and prove it to you that in no uncertain terms that these children come from Jewish backgrounds. The rabbi arrives there at night, and those days, the kids had many children in the monastery. They slept to their bedroom, and they were all in beds and about to go to sleep. And the rabbi says to the nun, to the mother superior, pay careful attention. I will show you. She says, what are you going to do? Just leave it to me, the rabbi says. And then he started to sing the Shema Yisrael. Started to sing a beautiful voice, the rabbi started to sing Shema Yisrael, Shem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. And as he started singing that in the room out loud, suddenly you hear from all the corners of the room, you have children saying, Mommy, Tate, Tate, Daddy, Daddy, Mommy. They all started hearing the music and the song, the Shema. It hit their heart. And even though they just heard maybe numerous years ago, but that's the way the mama and the papa used to put the children to sleep. And so the rabbi said, you see, all those children that recognize this song, they're all Jewish. And she says, the point, and she let that day, thousands of children were returned, hundreds, thousands of children were returned to their rightful place in the Jewish community. And that's because the Shema resonates. We all know Shema Yisrael. We all know the prayer of Shema. I hope we know it. At least a few words of it. Right? It's the prayer that I say it has amazing powers. One of the biggest powers of the Shema is whenever I go and I visit people who are dying, who are already like on the last breath, and the doctor says they haven't spoken in days, and they can't communicate, they can't anything. I just start singing Shema Yisrael, and suddenly the person starts mumbling the words in their last breath. They just wake up and they resonate with the Shema. Something about it. It's a magical prayer that connects to the very essence of the soul of the Jewish people. So we know that every morning in the prayers we say the Shema. But I'm going to speak to you today about a Shema that appears. It's called the mini Shema. It appears at the beginning of the davening. It's not the full-blown Shema of 3 paragraphs of the Shema, but there's a little mini Shema that shows up at the beginning of the prayer book. After we say the morning blessings, and we come to shul, and we start the introductory prayers, and we've been doing some of that. We did the last few weeks. We did the section about the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, and we explained why that is such an important introduction to the morning service. But in the introductory prayer to the morning service, there is a Shema. It's the mini Shema, a little Shema. That's just the first paragraph of the Shema, with some prayers before it and after it. And it takes up a very, very prominent place in the Siddur. Most people say, why do I have to say the Shema again? I'll say it later. I don't have to say it an extra time beforehand. And I'm going to tell you the story of the Shema. You give a look in the prayer books. If you have the prayer books with you, you'll find the Shema. And you'll see, when I tell you the story of this Shema, you'll see that nothing changed in the history of the world. In fact, what's going on now in the Middle East, in Israel, and the wars that's going on there all have to do with this prayer. You ask how and what? The mini Shema has to do with the whole situation today in the Middle East. The key to the whole episode of the Middle East is the story of this Shema. So if you give a look, it starts on page 15, but the Shema actually appears on page 16. We'll go back to page 15. We haven't studied that yet, but if you look on page 16, you'll see smack in the middle of the page of the Siddur, at the bottom half, you'll see Shema Yisrael. Shema Yisrael, after, right? And why is there a Shema that shows up before the Shema? We know you're supposed to say Shema in the morning and the evening, right? It says in the Shema itself, it says, when you go to sleep and when you wake up, you're supposed to say the Shema. So you're supposed to say Shema in the morning. There is the Shema in the middle of the Shacharit services. It's there very prominently right before the Amidah. Why do we say this? Why is there another Shema that we say just at the very, very beginning of the service in the introductory prayers? That some people say it to themselves quietly, others say it together with the minyan, but it's like an unofficial part of the davening. Well, where does this come from? So I'll tell you the story. About 1,500 years ago, when the Jewish people, I'm sorry, take them back, 2,500 years ago. Okay. 2,500 years ago, when the Jewish people were being persecuted by a nation none other than Iran, Persia. Okay. Persia. This was before the days of Muhammad, before the days of Islam, way before. When the Persian people were still idolatrous, worshipped gods, like the Greeks in their times and the Romans and all that. Everybody had their gods. And the Iranians, well, the Iranians then, they were the Persians then, right? Of course, they persecuted their Jews. And they brought decrees against the Jewish people at a certain point in the history of the Jewish people. And one of the decrees was at the time that the Persian Empire put into place was because they were idolatrous, they believed in different gods. They believed that there was one God for the good and one God for the evil, right? Like almost like in Christianity, you have the good, the God, and then Satan, right? So that was a popular notion in those days. So they believed there wasn't one God, but there was two gods. It wasn't Hashem Echad. They believed that there was one force of good, one force of evil. And so they banned the Jews from reciting the Shema. Because they knew the Jews believed in a one God, which was contrary to their belief. And they banned the synagogues from reciting the Shema. You could say all the other prayers, but the prayer that emphasizes the oneness of God, which is Shema, as we know, the prayer of Shema is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. Hashem tells it, Moses tells the Jewish people in the Torah, Hear, O Israel, hear the nation of Israel, pay careful attention. The Lord is our God, the Lord is one God. Monotheism, as they call it, right? Belief in one God. And that was one of Judaism's greatest contribution to the world, was the belief in one God as opposed to the idolatrous notions of many gods, or even two gods. But for whatever reason, at that time, the Persians, they couldn't accept the idea, which today, obviously, in Persia and Iran, they believe in Allah, which is a one God, not idolatrous at all. Allah is just another name for our God, for the Jewish God. Like you'll have a lot of times the Persians will say, the Iranians will say, or any Muslim will say, Inshallah. Inshallah means Be'ezrat Hashem, with the help of God, right? I'll be there, inshallah, whatever. This will happen. Allah is the name that they have. They believe now in one God. But at that time, the Jews were like ahead of the times, right? And we believed in what? They didn't believe. So they banned the Shema in the synagogues. I don't know if you ever heard this. But the rabbis were always very creative. And they came up with different ideas. They realized that you can't say Shema in shul, lest you are arrested and thrown into jail, lest the shul will be closed down, lest they'll have a pogrom, or whatever those days, whatever they did for the days of pogroms, but they knew how to do pogroms, even though there were no pogroms, right? They knew very well how to do it. So the Persians, Iranians, they banned it, and the rabbis came up with a creative idea of how to reinstate the Shema. They told the whole Jewish community that to save ourselves from the shul being closed down or being persecuted or burnt down or broken, or we're going to say Shema before we come to shul. Before we come to shul, we're going to make a prayer of the Shema at home. Quietly. So everybody will say the Shema, but you can't say it in shul. But we're not going to stop saying the Shema. We're going to say a smaller version of the Shema and say it at home. So at least everyone will get the Shema every day, every morning. So that was 2,500 years ago. And that prayer, that little Shema, even though this decree was only in place for about 5 years, so only 5 years they really had the need for saying the small mini Shema before coming to shul. But it became, like, by the way, the Jewish prayer book is not just a book of important prayers. It's also a book of history. It's our story. There are parts of the davening that really doesn't have to be today, but we keep it to remember our story. Like, for instance, another example is the Haftorah. You have the Torah reading and you have the Haftorah, a section of the prophets that we read every Shabbos. Where does that come from? You know where it comes from? There was a time that they banned Torah reading in synagogues. Some other ogre persecutor of the Jews said the Jews are not allowed to read the Torah. So again, the rabbis came up with a trick. What did they do? They didn't take out the Torahs. They didn't read the 5 books of Moses, but they allowed them to read the books of the prophets for whatever reason. So they read every week, instead of a Torah reading, they read a section from the prophets that reflects the parsha of the week. This goes back also like 1,500 years ago when this story happened. So this went on for a number of years. They couldn't read from the Torah in the shul on Shabbos. So the sages came up then with an idea. Let's call it the Haftorah, right? Haftorah. Haftorah means the dessert, like the part which comes after the Torah reading, right? So instead of the Torah reading, they read Haftorah, and they made blessings before and after the Haftorah, right? With the whole thing. So how did the Haftorah reading come about? It came about because Moses established a Torah reading. There was a time that the Jews couldn't read the Torah, so we started to read the books of the prophets, a section from the prophets that reflects. If you look at the Haftorah, it always has a little piece in it that tells you, like, so if you're reading about, let's say, the building of the Mishkan, the building of the temple and tabernacle, so you'll have a section about building of the temple in the books of the prophets, right? So like in last week was Parshas Noach. It was about Noach and the flood. So it takes the section where it speaks about in the prophets, it mentions Mei Noach, the waters of Noach. So it's mentioned in the Haftorah, so that's why anyways. But this is just sort of a side thing to tell us that half of davening would be half the time if we didn't have such a history. So even after they stopped persecuting the Jews and they allowed us to read the Torah, we said, now we're going to remember that generation of people that couldn't read the Torah, and they started reading a thing called the Haftorah. So today we read the Parsha, regular Torah reading, and the Haftorah. And the same is with this Shema. And another thing which is quite interesting is you go in every shul, there's always the repetition of the Amidah. Why was there the repetition of the Amidah? We always have the repetition of Amidah every time you go to shul. People say, why do I have to hear the same prayer twice? I already said it. I have to hear a whole repetition. So the answer is, where does it come from? What's the origins? It was a time when Jews were very, very illiterate, couldn't read well. Many Jews were illiterate, so the rabbis established that after everybody that's able to read the Amidah, Shemona Esrei, finishes it, the Chazan will repeat it so that people that can't read will be able to answer Amen. And if you say amen, it's like you say, like we agree, because they couldn't read, they were illiterate. So that's the origins of the Amidah. And today, the whole davening is filled with the repetition of the Amidah, repetition of the Amidah. You have to repeat it, right? Everything is double. Why? Because this is in commemoration of a time when there were illiterate people. Today, even though most people can read more or less, at least in Hebrew, at least in English they can read, right? So you don't really need it for that purpose. But we still do it because to remember that as Jews, we care for the people who are simple folk. We never forget about them. And that's important to us. So even though it's twice the time and you're hearing the same thing again, right? But in respect of the illiterate over the generations that the rabbis established for them a repetition. And that's pretty cool, actually. You know. In fact, that's how Donald Trump got into office. He didn't forget about the illiterate in America. He didn't forget about the simple farmers. And he reached out to them. And that everyone is saying now that's how he won. Because he reached out to forgotten America. Right? The intelligentsia will take care of themselves. But he got his votes here because he made the regular simple guy, simple bloke on the farm feel that somebody's thinking about them. Okay, I'm not going to get into politics now because politics is nicht can get the Zach. You know what I mean? You alienate those half the crowd. Talk about politics. But regardless, I think Trump will be good for Israel. But, I'm not telling you who to vote for because the vote happened already. He's now Melech al America. He's now the king in America, and that's the facts. But the point I'm making is that the whole Amidah was put in place for the illiterate. The Haftorah was for persecution. And this little Shema now also comes in, the little Shema, the mini Shema that you say before the real big Shema. Why do we say it? To remember that we were persecuted by Iran 2,000 years ago. So nothing's changed in the world, right? So every time you read it in the morning, you'll say, okay, they're throwing some missiles, 300 missiles at Israel. We're going to say the little Shema. Because the Jews are always one step ahead of these guys. Right? We're always one step ahead. We know how to put in another Shema that we tell everybody to say at home. Yeah? We know how to make beepers explode. We know how to make, it's a Jewish thing, ingenuity. We come up with creative ideas. So we came up with a creative idea 2,500 years ago. So I'm going to take you through it a little bit now on the inside so you can read it and see it. And so we're going back to page 15. And when somebody reads this, if you don't hear my introduction here, you don't know what's the order, what's happening over here. If you give a look on page 15, it says, a man should forever be God-fearing in the innermost recesses of the heart, acknowledge the truth and speak the truth in his heart. Like if you read it in the Hebrew, it says you should be God-fearing privately, secretly. Now one wonders, why is it telling us over here you should be privately? You should be God-fearing in the secrets, in the innermost parts of your heart, like don't do it in public, do it in private. You understand why. Because I'm telling you, this is all an introduction to the mini Shema. The Jews were being persecuted in public. So they had to say the Shema privately. So that's why it says, Jews should be forever God-fearing in the innermost recesses of the heart and seek the truth in his heart. In other words, privately. In the Hebrew, it says actually, baseter, in the secret places. Baseter means in the private places. Because they weren't allowed to say the Shema in public. So that's why this is the introduction. Otherwise, you read it, if you don't know my story here, you don't know what's going on over here. Why suddenly does it say you have to be God-fearing in the private? And then comes another major question over here. So now you understand why it says that, because it's an introduction to the private Shema, the one that they were trying to hide in the house so that the authorities shouldn't find out about. Because otherwise, you have another big question that comes here. Question is, why does it say to be God-fearing privately? Makes no sense. You can't be a Jew in public. Well, it's a strange sort of thing. We always tell our kids, if you have it, flaunt it. Don't hide your Jewishness. Don't hide your Yiddishkeit, right? Over here it says a person should be God-fearing in the recesses of the heart, that privately. Be a Jew in private. What about in public? Yeah. What about why would you say so? Now we have a little bit of understanding why it says to be a Jew in private, because they couldn't be in those days in public a Jew. So it was like the days of the Moranos in Spain. They had to hide the Shema. So that's why it says you should be God-fearing in private. But we still say this prayer. Why would we continue to say this? And the answer is, I saw a beautiful explanation, is that as a Jew, we have to be Jewish privately and publicly. But what he's talking about over here is the private domain and the public domain. In other words, a person goes to business, so then you're not in the territory of Yiddishkeit. You're going out in the world, in the public domain. So over there, you're not, it's not a time for prayer. It's not a time, you're not davening, you're not in a shul. You're a Jew. But when you're in the business world, you're in the real world. So he says, no, even then, even when you are in the public domain, even when you are in the business, always remain on the inside a Yid. Remember who you are. That means even in the places of the public, you should also always be on the inside, strong Jew. Okay. In the shul, you could be on the inside and the outside. But when you go to business, you're busy in other things. You're busy in the world. You're busy dealing with this. He says, not even when you go into the world, a person should always remain God-fearing in the recesses of the heart. And by the way, I didn't say before, that's why it says acknowledge the truth. What does it mean, acknowledge the truth? Acknowledge the truth is the Shema. This is the introduction to the Shema. That even if you can't say Shema in public, you should acknowledge the truth privately at your house, right? Like we said before. Always be ready to acknowledge the truth that Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. And this is our story, and we're sticking to it. So, ladies and gentlemen, the Jewish people, we have a big history of big Shemas and small Shemas. Because Shema is the belief in the one God, and even when we were in the most hostile places in our history, we felt it's our mission to always be reiterating the beautiful Shema. And even with the kids after the Holocaust, this was the key to their soul, the key to who they were. The Shema always is, like we say over here, it's the Yira Shamayim Baseiser. It's the secretive God-fearing, the Pintel Yid that we have deep down inside. So it says always a Yid has that Pintel Yid that's always there and can never be taken away from us. So even though sometimes on the outside they persecute us, they tell us we can't do things, but we know deep down inside who we are and what we are, and nobody can take that away from us. And this is the story of the little Shema that we spoke about today. So wish everybody a good tevach, and we'll back next week, Mitzvah Shem. And anyone would like to come to my class, I have a class on medical ethics, and other contemporary Jewish ethics. It's on Tuesday nights. Tuesday nights at 8 o'clock at the shul live. So you have to sign up online. Just look at come, because every class is sort of semi-independent. So you don't need to be there for all the classes. You can sign up now as well. So I wish everyone a good tevach, Shabbos, all the best.
Shabbos.
If anyone has any questions, you're welcome to ask. Good? Okay. Thank you. Send
Thank you.
regards to everyone.
Thanks
Okay.
for the explanation.
Thank you, Rabbi. Shabbat
Have a
shalom,
good job.
everyone.
Thank you.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
All the best.
Bye-bye.